he's actually recovering off of a screen here. There was literally anything better that he could have done here.
That was really good defense.
Like, that was ridiculous. And he's able to stonewall Chet. That was so essential to the Nuggets' comeback in that game.
I'm waiting to get through a whole season so I can anoint CB as the certified three-point shooter.
Well, he had a good three-point shooting season last year, too.
Yeah.
He's just not hesitating now and still making them, which is really nice.
We had a game where he hit 7 threes, the three-point shots back. It's something we had been debating all offseason.
Sure did. I lost that debate. Turns out teams don't like it when a guy keeps hitting wide open threes on them. That Clippers game was a great example. They couldn't get anything inside. So Jokic just started popping. It's been essential to providing the opportunity for these young guys to operate on the interior. Even Julian, like, he's able to cut.
When it comes to Project Dynasty, we know that the Booth boys have to really step it up and be a contributor to get the Nuggets back to fully contending status. Let's go to Peyton Watson, though, because his three has been there more than it was at the beginning of the season, which is going to be important for him. That was the message to him before the season. It's part of the Nuggets' overall strategy to get more threes. He has to be a 3-and-D role player at this point. That's just by necessity and style of the pace and space era. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some interesting stats on him and just the fact that he made just huge plays to win games for us, whether there was a block on Kyrie or Shea on a final possession to win the game. What have been your Pwat impressions? And we'll look at some clips here.
So the thing that's obviously impressed me the most about the last 5 games for him is just his defensive progression. Like, that was the thing that worried me the most to start the season. Like, we already know he's kind of a raw offensive player, and even if he's improved in some ways, like, it's going to take a while for those to come along in game. But I was really worried with him coming off with the hamstring, how he looked to start the season defensively, because he was just not impacting anything. Throw all that out the window. Over the last, I would say 4.5 games, like I said, that second half of that Raptors game. So I guess that's 3.5 games, whatever. He's been sensational on defense again, just like he was last year. In the OKC game, if you could pull up the clips of Pwat on Chet. So they put him on Chet so that he could switch these actions. Go ahead. And then he's able to recover, and he and MPJ sort of collectively get the block here. The other one is when he's stonewalling. Okay, so he's on Chet in the second half of this game, and he's able to stonewall Chet. And I think that was so essential to the Nuggets' comeback in that game. One of the things I forgot to mention earlier is how impressive it was, and just how good it was to see the Nuggets look impressive again. And the part of the formula that was missing up until that point was the defense. We hadn't seen them go on those like 9-0, 10-0, 12-0 runs like they did last year, even in like the starters minutes. Like, they have this like great net rating, but they're like really chipping away at things. And it's a lot of like, we're kind of outscoring you, we're outgunning you, but it's not as much like those, we're stifling you on defense and then immediately scoring on the other end. That hasn't been happening. That run in the third quarter of the game versus OKC was due in large part to Peyton's defense on Chet. And that was just one aspect of his defensive versatility. We talked a bit about Malone playing him at the 5 in the Miami Heat game. Now, we talked about it offensively. And there were some minutes in that stretch where they were like, let's put Russ on Bam or whatever it is. But Peyton guarded Bam some as well, if you could bring up that clip too. So he is obviously giving up a lot of ground to Bam here, but he doesn't just get bowled over in this possession and then he and MPJ are collectively able to force that turnover. It gave the Nuggets the option of going to that in a spurt. And that has been, you talked about just like, what is the ceiling of his defensive versatility? I don't know. And I like that I don't know. And I like the fact that just this stretch of the last 5 games has, completely flipped my, my perception of that from a pretty negative, outlook on that end of the floor. In the Dallas game, Malone talked about in the post game, like, yeah, the reason Peyton played 40 minutes today and Hunter was out of the lineup is because he wanted to match Peyton's minutes with Luka. Now, I don't think Peyton was actually effective on Luka like the whole night. I think Luka was just having a bad night, and we know Luka kind of
Yeah.
bullies guys of his like archetype, the Jaden McDaniels types, pretty easily. And he
Yeah.
did a couple times in that game. But whenever Peyton was put on Kyrie, I thought he was actually quite effective. His length gives him, he's not the best screen navigator. He might be the best screen navigator on this team, though, which is a problem.
Uh-oh.
But his length gives him so much margin for error when recovering around screens. If you go to that game-winning block that he had over Kyrie, he's actually recovering off of a screen here because Kyrie comes off a screen and pulls up from 3, and Peyton is able to come off of it and recover to block his 3-point shot. I thought he did the best one-on-one job on Kyrie too. We talked about like he doesn't have the most like sound defensive like fundamentals in terms of footwork, but he has so much margin for error with his length. I actually want you to show the clip of a tough shot that Kyrie made, because I want you to watch Peyton's defense on this possession and ask if there was literally anything better that he could have done here.
This bank shot was insane.
Like, that was ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
And
that
those were
was
the
really
types
good
of
defense.
shots. That was excellent defense, and he was the only one that could like stay in front of Kyrie. And the reason for that is not because of the quickness or anything like that, but because he had more margin for error in his recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And he also stayed like pretty sound, like he wasn't biting on fakes or anything on that possession, which was good, right? That's the other thing that I've talked about with Peyton is how much he learns over the course of, sometimes it's like one game to the next game. Like last year, I think I talked about this earlier on an earlier episode where he gets completely like cooked by DeRozan, biting on every fake in the first time they play the Bulls. The next time they play the Bulls, he's playing like perfect defense on him. But we got to see him kind of grow in his feel for the scouting report just over the course of the game on a player that wasn't even his primary assignment and who had been cooking the Nuggets the entire game in Kyrie Irving. So of all the things that I want to temper expectations about, Peyton's defense is not one of them, because I've been beyond impressed with his performance the last few games.
Yeah, and it's beautiful to see him be deployed, whether at the center or guarding someone as fast and twitchy or skilled as Kyrie. That's what Malone mentioned before the season, is that Peyton has versatility and can be deployed on a matchup basis on different players night to night to night. That's something that like AG does. Now Pwat's filling in for AG and kind of doing that. It's good to see the pep in his step, so to say, back in like the athleticism.
Seen him guard Kyrie Irving, RJ Barrett, Chet Holmgren, Bam Adebayo, Luka Doncic, less effectively than the first 3.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just in terms of that versatility. And then, we can't really get out of this conversation without talking about his help defense on his game-saving block in the OKC game. So this was really impressive, because if you play the clip, Pwat missed 2 what would have been game-sealing free throws, although against this Thunder, you never know. And then we got Russ on the floor. He gets blown by. Peyton comes in, and he just, again, barely grazes the ball with the tip of, I think, his middle finger. But he gets up there to block the shot. And we're going to get to see, the slow-mo of this coming up here. Okay, this is insane. Look at this. And that could have been, I don't even know if that was going to be like a little scoop shot. That could have been a fake that turned into a lob for Chet at that point, because he sees Peyton rotating over. But he gets the ball, so it doesn't matter, and we don't have to find out. He also gets the rebound there, if you see. Yeah. And this is all right after he misses 2 would-be game-sealing free throws. So I've been beyond impressed with Peyton defensively over this stretch. I can't say enough good things about Peyton's defense, which I didn't have any good things to say about Peyton's defense in the first 5 games.
I know, that was the big concern, is people were like, Peyton Watson is not going to fit on this team. We need to trade him Like, he was just one of the biggest disappointing pieces to start out the year. And the defense was the thing we thought was a known with him, and we were questioning it, but it's back. It's evident. You can see it. The help defense, on ball, navigating screens, whatever. I mean, obviously, he can still improve. Like, he has got to get reps, and it's going to be instinctual, natural for him the more it goes on. But just the raw athleticism still there, and I'm happy to see that. The offense is the thing that he needs to keep improving on for sure.
Yes.
We're seeing it here and there, of course, like rim finishing. We're seeing it. It's not a complete zero. The 3-point, we're seeing it. It's not a complete zero.
It's not a complete zero, but it could stand to be better.
Yeah, not a complete zero. That's something. His defensive production is something that's always going to be there. And question,
like, I'm glad to see that again, because we didn't know that after the first few games.
Is that making up for the continued offensive limitations? And how have you seen his offensive game growing?
I think in the regular season, especially with AG out, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that dynamic, Peyton's defense can make up for a lot, especially because of how he can play within the flow of the Nuggets offense, right? He's been making his threes the last few games, and that has certainly helped, right? But sometimes they've got him playing the dunker spot. Haven't seen him as much as a cutter this season. I actually can't recall a possession where he is scoring as a cutter from this season, but we saw that a lot more last year. So maybe that's another thing that we might see at some point this year, because even without the scoring aspect, like, he might have a little bit more roll gravity in that, kind of like how, like, AG cuts and like a bunch of guys go with him and it opens up things on the outside. But, comparing his role again to, what AG normally does for this team, I actually thought that a member of Nuggets Twitter, Calvin Booth, at Calvin Booth, had a really good point about Peyton's offense. So he's doing a good job of filling in the cracks while AG is away, but he hasn't shown enough to assuage the concerns about that offensive fit when AG is back. So playing that small forward role. He talked about this in the preseason, how he's looking forward to doing more small forward stuff, and especially on this team that requires being able to operate more on the perimeter. We've seen little flashes again, and we saw flashes of it last year, but it wasn't consistent, right? He was able to hit that elbow midi when he was, playing the 5 in the backup minutes. So that is like, okay, he can do something on the perimeter there. He's been hitting some of his threes. We're going to expect that to be streaky, especially because the shot form is not, trustworthy, let's say, but keep hitting them, kid. Like, that is always helpful. If you could play the clip of this bailout floater that he had in the game versus the Raptors. I don't know if you remember watching this possession in person, but I was really worried. This was a game where Julian was struggling with on-ball pressure. He wasn't able to get anything on Shed. And so he kind of tosses the grenade to Peyton, and he's able to create just this bailout floater out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, that went in. Okay. He's gone to that floater a few times this season. And I've kind of been wondering, like, what is this kid doing? Because it wasn't falling necessarily. But again, a great bailout shot. He's not going to it as like the thing that he's trying to create, especially because he's not getting as many perimeter creation reps. In spot up situations, he's usually just catch and shoot for the most part. Like, that was an example of where he slashed and was able to create that shot off the dribble. I'd like to see more of that in order to assuage some of my concerns, almost more than the 3-point shot, because it would give us more options in terms of what he can do on the ball, frankly.
Yeah.
And that would, like, I've talked a lot about, like, what is it that the Nuggets need from all of these guys to fill in the cracks that we have with our on-ball creation. But what did you think about that sort of comparison, like how he fits, like, maybe perfectly right now while AG is out, but not necessarily showing enough for when AG is back?
Yeah, because it's going to change his position. I think, he's having success at the 4. I think ideally he could be most like
Next to
deadly as a
Jokic, to
yeah,
be clear.
that's true. I think he could be most deadly as like a three who can do more things on the perimeter and slash and if he can get a floater, it'd be amazing. I think he has decent touch. I think he got an offensive rebound and it was just no one was coming after him and he just kind of like outstretched his long arm and just kind of put it in on
I would
one.
like to see that touch be applied to making more of his layups.
Yeah, exactly.
I believe last season he shot like 43% in the paint non-restricted area, which was among the best on the team. Obviously, Jokic is at like 60 something percent on all those floaters, right?
Yeah.
But like he was really good in that like push shot sort of range last year. And I'm curious if that, is sustainable and if it could continue.
Yeah. I think last season, a lot of what I was looking at was how he was modeling his game after AG, just playing in the dunker
Mm.
spot. He was hitting some threes, but it wasn't like a huge emphasis for him as much as this year because the shooting is like
Mm.
a need. I don't know if it's just because that's the messaging to him that he's spotting up. And I don't know how much we're going to see as far as getting to certain spots and what it is that he's utilizing on the offensive end this season. But the more that he can incorporate and get comfortable with when AG's back, the better. So,
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, speaking of shooting, we should probably talk about Nikola Jokic just really quick and how he fits into how these young guys are developing right now.
hmm yeah, I
Um,
mean, he's been
yeah, go ahead.
taking more threes. Obviously, at a game where he hit 7 threes, the 3-point shots back. It's something we had been debating all offseason. We're happy to see it.
Sure did. I lost
Uh,
that debate.
I don't know. I don't know. I think you still have a case, like, because it's like, yeah, Jokic is always going to be he's the best player in the league. He's going to be deadly inside the perimeter and in the post. When he has his three going, it just makes it that much more difficult. It's almost unfair. It's ridiculous. So, do you think he's been deliberately taking more threes because of the shooting concerns?
I absolutely do think that his 3-point attempts are up by one full per game, which is like a 30% increase basically from last year, from 2.9 attempts to 3.9 attempts per game. Part of that is pace, but if you just kind of weigh everything out, that's this year, that's 21% of his shots coming from three compared to 16% of his shots last year. And I said I lost the debate about the importance of Jokic's 3-point shot. I'm going to declare that I lost that debate. And here's why. Because on this roster, the spacing is not the same. We talked about how the lack of respected 3-point shooters, like guys are making the shots that they're getting. Like that is just true. I'm not taking away from that. But teams are not guarding them the way that they were, like the duo of KCP and MPJ. That's just a fact, right? And we talked about how it was impacting Jamal, but I think Jokic is also starting to experience it as well. His shooting around the rim is down this year again, and the floater is not looking as good either. And I can't help but wonder if that's because of a more packed paint. We talked about how last year he was well over 60% in that floater range. And this year so far, he's at 53 on his
Mhm.
floaters. So he did go through a mini slump with the floater last season, but it was like in December, like it was weird and whatever. I didn't really see any other reason for it than a slump. Maybe that's what this is, but I do think that having more space to operate makes that floater more comfortable, and he doesn't have that this year. But the fact that he's taking more threes and that he's making them opens up so much more for all these other guys, right? Now, Jokic is hitting Christian, for example, a lot more on cuts from the post, but I can't help but think about all the times in the last 5 games where he's out of the 3-point line and teams are closing out on him and he's able to pump fake and drive. Like, I think it's dumb because I'm like, you guys better live with that three because if he gets into that paint, you're cooked.
Mhm.
And I thought the teams were going to keep, letting him shoot that shot, but it turns out teams don't like it when a guy keeps hitting wide open threes on them, and they're going to close out whether the scouting report says to or not. And there are many times especially the first 5 games, because the shooting of the rest of the team was just abysmal. It was really just Jokic and AG carrying while MPJ was still finding his shot and all of that too. He was just deciding that Clippers game was a great example. because the Clippers were packing the paint so much they couldn't get anything inside, and everything they tried was resulting in a turnover. So Jokic just started popping a ton more. He's like, this is what we're getting. And it wasn't just to get his own shot, but with him popping, it opened up more space on the inside for the other guys to get to their shots, Jamal, AG, etc. And so that's the thing. The reason that we're talking about this in the Project Dynasty section is because it's been essential to providing the opportunity for these young guys to operate on the interior, frankly, because even Julian, like you think about him as he's already a respected shooter on this team more so than like Peyton and Christian, even though they're actually shooting better from three right now. But reputation is everything. But he's able to cut and drive and all of that whenever Jokic is popping on the floor as well. I think it's just important because it adds to the argument of why Jokic is the best player in the world and that he can play with anybody and play any style. And it's easy to say now that he's like making his shots. Obviously, I was hedging this summer when I said he doesn't need the 3-point shot to be the best in the world. But yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Also, part of the reason was that Christian Braun's three, while not being fully respected right now, was a shot that many were skeptical of, despite any percentages. And it's still holding steady. He hasn't gone in a slump yet. So let's talk about Christian Braun, because his offense has been the talk of the town, even more than his defense. Which we know CB has proven to be a good defender through multiple seasons. Not necessarily something we're wondering about. Now we're wondering about how sustainable his offense is and how he's operating within the offense. So how do you feel about CB as an offensive player? And has he been better on offense this year than defense? And if so, would that concern you?
So you just said that the defense is not something that we have a question about because he's been a good defensive player the last couple of years. I would have agreed like 10 games ago, but it's not that Christian's been a bad defender, but he's definitely struggled in particular matchups. I do think that he's been a better offensive player than defensive player over the first 10 games, and even particularly over the last 5, because while he has been able to thrive in certain matchups, I thought he did a great job on Cam Thomas on the Nets, but he was getting absolutely cooked by Dennis Schroeder. I thought he did a good job on RJ Barrett, but he was getting cooked by Grady Dick, especially off ball. There was an interesting thing that happened in the second half of that Toronto game where you're wondering, like, why isn't Grady Dick more involved? And you're like, oh, is it like ball denial from Christian? Like, whatever. Whenever they were in the second half, they were just trying to run isolations for Grady Dick on Christian instead of what they were doing in the first half, which is running him off of screens.
Yeah.
And that was like the easiest way to shed him. So I thought that the Raptors just made a tactical error in that respect. And even, a matchup that he thrived in last year versus Anthony Edwards, Ant was cooking him off of screens in that Minnesota game. I think we talked about this on the last show, all of the open threes that the Nuggets gave up throughout that game, but again, in the clutch, were on miscommunications. But part of the reason for those miscommunications is they have to do all this switching because Christian is struggling to get around these screens and fight over them. We talked about the Kyrie matchup and how Peyton did a better job because he has more like margin for error on recovery. But Christian was getting just barbecued in that matchup in the first half. And we talked about that tough shot that Kyrie hit over Peyton. That's not what was happening when Christian was the primary defender. It's mostly just like Kyrie being able to very easily shed Christian off on a screen and then just getting this open look. And it was the same again with Tyler Hero and the Heat.
Oh God, we didn't even talk about that. Just real quick, Tyler Hero was just getting downhill so easily, just free layups. It was kind of crazy to see, but
free layups. And he was actually getting downhill. He's been a much better player this year. I feel like he should be a most improved candidate because his shot selection is great, his playmaking is great, but the Heat suck right now. It's not his fault. Like the silver lining here is that almost once per game in this stretch, I swear it's happened like every game. I've seen him get scored on in a way where I'm like, Christian, like, you got to block that. You got to stop that guy, whatever. And then go down on the other end of the floor and end up with a wide open three off of whatever action is happening and then cashing it on these above the break threes. So that's what kind of spurred this question of like, has he been a better offensive player than defensive player? He's shooting 42% on his wide open threes. He's shooting 57% on his above the break threes right now. Like all of them. There's still a giant discrepancy with the corner three-point shooting, which I find to be hilarious. Like very Bruce Brown, where he's shooting 17% in the right corner and then 38% in the left corner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with this isn't good. I don't trust the shooting to continue at this rate. And that's the thing is like they've needed the shooting to be at this rate to win these games because they've been so close.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he needs to reclaim I am the best perimeter defender on this team because he's going to be at the point of attack of the best guys most of the time. That's going to require him to have a bit better just technique when it comes to like fighting over these screens so that he's not giving up as many switches because that's a big part of it too. One of the things I actually want to talk about related to this is actually Adam Maris from DNVR went on Kevin O'Connor's show. I think it was yesterday. And he was talking about how the Nuggets had some quote internal metrics that he was privy to somehow. I'm sure he has his sources that showed that KCP ranked low on some of these internal metrics on various aspects of like getting really physical, whether it was like, I don't know, whether it was like boxing out guys or like doing more things in the paint, ground coverage, and like doing lots of stuff. He always ranked really low on these internal metrics, which I was pretty shocked to hear because I feel like KCP and how often he was fighting over screens, both on and off the ball, to stay attached to his guy who was more often than not the best perimeter player on the opposing team and constantly getting like hit in the face, drawing these offensive foul calls on these screens. Like Christian's not getting those calls because he's not able to fight over the screens like that. Getting hit in the face because he's not giving these players any airspace. It's shocking to me that would appear in these internal metrics. And really, I think it's interesting. Like we've talked, we had our whole like media story last week already, right? About like the front office trying to do a cleanup job on their reputation after a really rough, I think objectively rough off season. And one of the bigger parts of that was losing KCP, right? But I also don't think that anything those internal metrics said would have made them keep KCP. Like regardless of what they said, like we saw the number that they let him walk for. So I just think it's kind of like strange that like this is out there now. It also just doesn't seem to match up with the reality of everything KCP did defensively. Now, Mike Malone, he's been very outward about not wanting us to compare Christian and KCP. The point that I want to make is how much the Nuggets defense is suffering as a result of Christian not being able to have the same defensive impact as KCP. Now, he could do it in another way. Let's say he never becomes a better screen navigator, whatever. He has to make sure he locks down these guys at least in isolation. Like you can't be getting cooked off the dribble by Tyler Hero. You have to lock up Dennis Schroeder if he's rejecting a screen even, right? You can't fight over a screen, whatever. Like get under it, like you figure out a way, right? There are other things that the Christian can do to weaponize his own tools. And we've already talked about in some of these matchups, Cam Thomas, SGA. I think he's been by far the best defender on SGA on this team. And he's been much better in that matchup than even I thought he would be in the two games that they played versus OKC. Actually wonder why they went to Russ on him in that last possession, but it was just like, whatever. Maybe to make Russ feel good. But that's just something I really want to highlight because I think that the defense was such a big part of what gave the Nuggets a margin for error to win 57 games last season. Even when the offense was sputtering at different points last year.
It is surprising to hear based on the way that KCP fights through screens. I think CB, I don't actually know how much like their height comparisons, but to me, he just,
KCP was like a solid 6'5", and Christian is like a solid 6'7".
yeah, it's just, I just think CB's so much bigger and it's just so much harder, as we know, for bigger players to navigate through screens. I think KCP, he's like, even if he's smaller, he's skinnier. CB has some muscle. It's hard to get through stuff like that. That's why CB's better at guarding like an Ant versus KCP, but not as good as guarding a Schroeder or a Tyler Hero or Grady Dick. I totally get your concern. It's valid. I'm excited about CB's offense, and I would rather it be at this. Obviously, everyone wants his three to be this good. I agree that it's definitely not going to be sustainable. It's going to go down. I hope it's not like a horrible slump, and this was just like a super hot streak, never to be seen again. I'm waiting for like to get through a whole season so I can anoint CB as the certified 3-point shooter. So I'm impatient for that. I also think
well, he had a good 3-point shooting season last year too.
Yeah.
He's just not hesitating now and still making them, which is really nice.
And he wasn't a starter last year, so it's just, I don't know if it's just the different role and emphasizing his shot, and just he's working on his offensive game. I bet way more than defense. I bet him and the team are almost taking his defense for granted a little bit and just like, yeah, do what you do, but like, this is what you got to do on offense. And maybe that's where his focus is.
And we saw that at the beginning of last year too, where even like off the bench, they had him taking on more of that like point guard role. And he was looking rough defensively to start last season too. And then in the second half, he totally locked in. And then he was like, all right, this is the guy. So, that's a really good point to make just on those defensive numbers. We're actually 27th in half court defense this season, which is atrocious. We were 5th last year. But in the title year, they were not good. Through 10 games, they were 21st in half court defense, which is not 27th, but it's still not good. And then they ended up finishing 15th overall. So maybe this season's going to look like that. And again, that title year, they had KCP. Anyway, it's not like this automatic thing. Like a lot of it is communication and chemistry and all of this other stuff. But that's like the one thing that's really keeping me, because I can have all the questions that I have about Peyton's offense, about Julian's offense, about whether Christian's shooting is going to keep up. But if I thought that the defense was going to look anywhere near what it looked like last year, I would feel a lot more comfortable about where I want the Nuggets to be in the title contention race than they do, because I think Jokic is playing at this just unbelievable level offensively, that if they could figure the defense out, I actually do think they could figure the offense out enough. But I already know that this offense is unsustainable because of these shooting numbers, that I'm like, this defense like really needs to catch up soon.
I think the key thing for CB will be a message that's similar to what Malone has always told Mike, who is known as a offensive player and less a defensive, is that if your shot's not falling, you're not contributing on offense. Really focus on contributing in other ways, whether that's just back to the basics of rebounding and playing hard defense and rotating and help side defense, which I feel like Mike has done.
It's not like mistakes, though, except for like the communication stuff on screens, right? It's not like when Mike, like he'll get into his shooting slumps and then he starts like not rotating on time. Like that's not really the kind of stuff that we're seeing that's like the issue with Christian. It's like, oh, this is like a big fundamental difference in the way that he's a good defender versus what we had before. And it's like taking time to adapt. Like we've had to adapt the defense of the team defense entirely because of that, right? Like we talked about how they're doing more switching now.
I think the basic like principles of the defense are still there, where it's like at the level, hedging on screens or blitzing, and then the low man rotating and like help side defense and all that jazz. I mean, maybe it's not as consistent, and maybe CB is still getting used to that. I guess it's just I have full faith still in CB's ability. I just think he's focused on other things. I could be wrong. Like maybe he's taken a step back. Maybe he's just never going to be good at guarding quick guards. We'll see where he improves. Maybe just through time and reps of navigating screens he'll improve. Maybe navigating screens with Jokic more specifically, because KCP and him were like in lockstep. It was like instinctual. Maybe that's still growing. I don't know. I guess it's just, I'm thinking when and if, well, hopefully if CB's shot doesn't fall, he's gonna have to realize that the way that he's gonna impact the game and help win is to be super aggressive and putting effort on defense. If it's not a matter of him not giving effort and he's just like taking a step back, then that sucks. But if it is a matter of like just putting your focus there and really trying in that sense, then
I doubt it's an effort thing. Like, it doesn't look like an effort thing to me is the thing.
the only reason I say that is because when I was at the Raptors game, which was another point I wanted to bring up, was the defense was trash and we didn't
hot dumpster fire.
We didn't put up like I could noticeably see, just being in there in person, like the intensity rise up at the end. And I do think the Nuggets are coasting a little bit. And then when it's like, they're the clutch merchants like last season, I think that they like raise their defensive intensity up when it's like they know they have to win the game and they just have to get a couple stops and then score on the offensive side. And I'm just like waiting for harder, tougher matchups, or when the playoffs come, to see full and defensive intensity across the whole game, which I am skeptical of, because the Nuggets, we haven't seen them put like together a really complete game in quite a while. Like, we only saw a couple of those even last season. And we're not going to get to the top 3 defense that Malone was saying that he wants. So I just think when we need to put the effort on defense, we can. It's just, I think we're slacking a little bit right now.
That's good insight, because I can't see things, up close and all that. We know that these freaking clutch merchants, they really like to lock in at the ends of games. But the problem with that is that you end up making a lot more more games like 50-50 or closer to 50-50 than they should be. Like both of those Raptors games that came down to missed pull-up threes from RJ Barrett. It's like really bailed out, because they were both like not great looks. Like the second one, the one where Russ was contesting, was not a great look, but that was the one that was in and out too. So, the basketball gods are cutting them some slack right now, but I think they need to not burn it. Let's talk just a little bit about some of the things that CB has been focused more on than the defense, because I've actually been really impressed with his ability to run empty side pick and roll with Jokic. If you could bring up the clip where he's actually able to score, because it's versus a defensive coverage that you and I talked about during the Wolves series. So he's throwing the ball into Jokic here, and he's going to come off the DHO. Bam is going to try to recover back to Jokic and like ignore him completely. And part of that's because of a little, you'll see Christian do a little hesitation here, but he keeps his dribble alive, and then he's able to get the dunk. As Duncan is chasing him over this screen for some reason. I think you should obviously go under the screen for Christian. That's just like what you should do. But it's more difficult when he's running into the DHOs like this, right?
Yep. It's crazy because Jokic didn't even roll. Like, usually these bigs, when they're guarding this action,
he pops.
Yeah, Jokic pops. But even there, it's like, I think Bam was like, oh, I might have to, rotate back.
Right.
If he passes, he's like, oh,
he might roll late or something.
Just that little hesitation from
Christian.
Bam. Yeah, from Christian.
Oh, yeah.
His hesitation dribble, but then Bam's hesitation of like, should I go back to Jokic? Creates an opening.
We talked about this coverage in the Wolves series, because that's what they were doing to Jamal like the whole time. They're like, all right, Jamal, you finish around the rim, you make a floater, like whatever it is. And Christian's like, oh, I'm going to get a dunk out of this.
Yeah, it's good that he like just stayed with it and wasn't like scared by the double that came, because usually you're like, young player.
And he's immediately passed back to Jokic like right now.
Yeah, and it's like a turnover because Bam was anticipating or whatever. It's like he stayed aggressive, and he didn't. I think he's got to know that teams are going to, on average, lean towards Jokic in terms of gravity, and that those looks are going to be open.
If you could go to the next clip as well, they run the same thing, except it's not off a DHO. He's just running the pick and roll. And then he's actually able to make the dump off pass to Hunter off a cut here, but then Haywood Highsmith recovers in time to force the turnover. But I was really impressed with both of those plays, because obviously he gets a dunk out of one, and then he almost gets a play for what would have been a layup or a dunk for Hunter on the next one. And that was just a good read. So it's just another example of what I've been talking about with clearly the team knows, because they've been running a lot more pick and roll with Christian this year. They know they need another reliable ball handler, whether, because I don't think that Russ is going to be playing high minutes in the playoffs, and Jamal can't do it literally all the time. Obviously, we have AG and Jokic, but just as many ball handlers on the court as possible who can operate in pick and roll, just do something to force a switch and then like get the ball to Jokic and like whatever it is, being comfortable running that. That is something that we didn't really see a ton of from KCP last year. They tried to do a little bit of it at the beginning of the season when Jamal was out, but KCP was clearly like, pick and roll is not really like his thing. He would come off the DHO and like go for the midi. That was something that they were able to do because he was comfortable operating on the perimeter. Christian is operating off the with an empty side so that he can get downhill, and that is a different dynamic as well for the offense. So that's like something in that plus column for Christian's offense for sure.
Mm-hmm. Let's just talk a little bit about Julian and how you're feeling on him.
So for Julian specifically, I actually think he's been a lot shakier offensively than I would have wanted to see versus the staunch defenses that they played in the last, again, it's only a 3-game sample size, but he's gotten a bit freaked out by length on defense. He's been throwing up some wild floaters, and he hasn't been making as many of his threes either. So just over the 3 games where they played the Thunder, the Heat, and the Mavs, he's shooting 35% from the fields and 20% from 3. Right? It was really like impressive and good to see him start off the season like super efficient from the field. He's not even taking like a ton of threes. I think he's even right now only taking 5 attempts per game. But he was getting good looks and he's just not making them. And then once he's inside the arc, I think he's panicking a little bit too much versus these tough defenses. And one of the things that I, said, it was either our last episode or the one before that, where we talked about like, where do these guys need to be by the end of the year to be known playoff contributors? And we need Julian to be a playoff contributor, assuming the roster stays the same by the time the playoffs come around, is that he needs to be around the level of comfort and like trustworthiness offensively as Aaron Wiggins. And that's not what I've seen from him versus these really good defenses, unfortunately. The good thing is like his spacing seems to be relatively respected when he is coming off of these pin downs. Like guys are chasing over, like he's getting, that coverage. And so he's able to still be a positive on the floor, similar to like when MPJ's having a bad shooting night, he's still a positive just because of the spacing that he provides by virtue of that gravity. But that might change if teams start figuring out that he, isn't consistently efficient. And so that is definitely something that has concerned me.
Honestly, a lot of the success we've had with Julian in these lineups is just the fact that the defense thinks he's like a deadly 3-point shooter, and that's what he's supposed to be. They could probably get away with it more if they just let him shoot a little bit. Although his open threes, I'd love to see the stats on that because I feel like
all his threes are open, honestly.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. He's just inconsistent across the board, right? I'm still super hopeful on him. He's a second-year player. CB and Pwat are in the third years. He's on both sides. Like he has speed on defense, but he is like super unstable in a closeout or just not knowing how to balance his body to stay positionally sound on defense, whether it's like no matter where he is on the court. Similarly, like with the control in the paint when he's going for a floater or whatever, it's just a little bit chaotic. But he had an amazing play at the end of that Raptors game that he drove and had a layup off the glass through some contact, and that was a go-ahead bucket. So that was like a high-pressure moment. That was cool to see. But yeah, he's just got to keep showing that he can be in a rotation. We may just have to play him in a rotation in the playoffs because we're already so shallow, and he is someone who can theoretically
right now we do have to, and he has to be good enough to do that because we don't have anybody else on the perimeter. Like our guard core is really like not
lacking.
good right
Yeah.
now. So that's definitely a concern. I don't know if he's going to be ready to contribute offense versus playoff level defenses. I'm leaning towards no right now, just in terms of caution. Like, he's a second year player, right? Like, there's no reason
Mhm.
to have that expectation set on him. Um, I'm curious with respect to his bench production specifically. Do you think the fact that Dario isn't playing is contributing at all to the gap between Julian's recent play and how he looked, say, in the preseason? Because even when the regular season started, Dario was playing not playing well. It's not like those guys were playing off of each other, and Julian hasn't been as much a focal point of the bench offense since the preseason. And I find that interesting because he was very much the focal point of the bench offense in the preseason.
Yeah, so much of the messaging was that Dario would work really well with Strawther in a way where he would be doing handoffs or be, getting him the ball because he's a passer and creating open looks for him. I think once we kind of got him out of the bench unit and Russ just took over that responsibility of like trying to get people open threes by driving chaotically or whatever the hell and just using his passing skills, maybe just there's more clarity in the scheme. But I could be wrong about that.
I think that Russ needs to look for Julian more. I
Yeah,
think he needs to
definitely
look for
could.
both Julian and MPJ more, frankly, in those minutes. Um, One of the things that people have pointed out that's like part of the reason that like he and Dario didn't necessarily work like once the regular season started. One, Dario wasn't able to make layups, or at least in that 5-game stretch, right?
Hmm.
But the other thing is that Russ isn't great at like, I thought he'd be better at kicking out to three on those drives, but he's really good with a rolling big, and he's trying to find that interior pass. He's trying to find a cutter, but he's not necessarily looking to kick out on a shooter. And I think so many more of the possessions have been Russ driving rather than like a methodical, like, oh, he's a hub and he's looking to like, pass to Julian, who's coming off on some weak side action or something. That's what we saw more in the preseason, even when Dario wasn't the hub. Like, it was Russ as the hub and Dario screening, whatever, to kind of complete that action that they're trying to run on a given play. But ever since the season started, it's a lot of like Russ in transition, getting downhill in the half court, even like he's trying to get into things quickly, like run a pick and roll and then find the big or find a cutter. Not so much either methodically or in a drive and kick scenario looking for a shooter. So we've already talked about like Julian being inefficient, but I also just think he's not getting enough looks. And
Yeah.
maybe that's part of it.
I wonder if Russ just needs to know ahead of time when he's driving that that's what he's going to do. Whereas sometimes he's
Well,
driving,
yeah.
yeah, and he's like, I'm either going to try to go back to the big or to a pick and
Russ is not
pop.
going in there with a plan, Will.
Yeah. Well, there are times where he kicked out to Jamal or someone where I feel like he just knew that was almost what he was going to do. And therefore it was like easier for him to
Yeah.
accomplish it. Whereas
Yeah.
if he's trying to improvise and he's trying to pull the ball up and like he's already in the air and he's trying to get it out to a shooter and people are already swarming it and it ends up being a turnover or whatever. But that's definitely something he could improve on.
If you like our content, please do us a favor and hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and definitely subscribe. Leave us a review if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon Music, or just go over to there, hit the show page, and then give us a 5-star review anyway. And always remember that winning is fun and losing absolutely sucks.